Hi everyone, my name is Iben and welcome to the second video in this series, The Road to Planet Zoo 2. Thank you all so much for your reactions to the first episode. I really didn't expect it to go as well as it did. But yeah, thank you all for that. I will be making another video on aquariums as exhibits, as I want to address a few of the comments, but for now I want to take on a different topic, and as you might have seen in the title and the thumbnail, I want to talk today about the climbing system, one of the systems in this game we all pretty much have a love-hate relationship with. I want to talk first about everything that is great about the climbing system, because it cannot be understated. The climbing in this game is great. It is absolutely insane that we as players can build whatever we want and that animals will interact with it. Whether it be you building the climbing frame of your dream, whether it is recreating a climbing frame from your favorite zoo, or if you just make a forested area, animals will interact with these elements and will climb them and will perform really cool animations along the way. And I think it's something that we sometimes take for granted, but it's a massive leap in the zoo game genre, and I really think that Frontier took a very high risk by introducing it, but also gave us one of the biggest and coolest things that this game has to offer. The climbing system is incredible, the climbing system is great when it works, and that's the start of our hate-love relationship with the system, because as much as we love the system, there are things about it that simply do not work as well, or it takes us a very long time to get a climbing frame to a point where it actually works. And that's what I want to talk about in this video. I really did want to stress how incredible the climbing system is. I don't want to exaggerate in that. It is incredible that we have a system like this, but it's not without faults, and I think they can be solved relatively easily. And in this video we're going to take a deep dive into that, but before we can do that we need to take a look at what exactly is bad about the climbing system. When talking about what is bad about the climbing system, I think three issues are the most pressing and cause the most frustration among players. And I'll start with one of the most obvious ones, being animals don't climb enough. And I think we can split this up into two different categories. You have animals like the koala, the binturong, the red panda that just need to stay in climbing frames and trees much more often than they do in the game right now. And on the other hand, you have big apes, monkeys, cats, bears, animals that also spend a lot of time on the ground in zoos, but also really spend a lot of time in climbing frames. And I think the distinction between these two animals is important, and I'll talk about that later when I talk about the possible improvements that can be made to the climbing system. But I think universally we all kind of feel like climbing animals don't climb enough in this game, and we all really want them to climb more. The second issue that I see is animals don't climb specific pieces. It happens very often that you build a climbing frame and you simply don't know why the animals aren't climbing the climbing frame. And when you go into the traversable area menu, you get this, and one of the things that's super confusing is that you get a bunch of green lines with green indicating, hey, this is a positive color, this indicates that they probably should be climbable, but it isn't climbable. And is this because the lines aren't connecting? And why aren't the lines connecting? Are there other issues? We simply don't know. There is an issue with this game that certain pieces or certain parts of a climbing frame aren't climbable when we think it should be climbable. The last issue that we see a lot in several animals is animals jitter when climbing, and this is one of those things where I'm not gonna spend too much time on, because this just feels like something that Frontier just has to improve in their internal algorithm when it comes to climbing, and because I don't know enough about that algorithm, I simply cannot give that much feedback or say things that need to be improved. But I do want to take a look at it, and I'm gonna take one of the worst offenders, I guess, in this game, being the clouded leopard. Let's take a look at a video of that right now. So I'm aware that I picked an animal that is known for issues, but looking at the clouded leopard just slow motion jumping, moving sideways, climbing just in a very weird way, sinking into all kinds of materials, then moving sideways-ish again to just then ignore the biggest part of this platform from going from one platform to the other is just weird. And it's a shame because the climbing system is really cool, but these kinds of jittery bugs really take you out of it, especially when it starts climbing down here. It just looks weird. Why would a cat climb down like that on an angle that they could climb up relatively easily? Like, I can get it if it climbs in a vertical way like it's gonna do right now, but even then it just feels weird. And now we get to one of the biggest offenders in this video, is this. I don't know what happened here. This is a base game blueprint, and this is an animal that is just like a animal from the game. It's not a mod or anything, so this is just very weird that something like this happens. And perhaps there is something wrong. Perhaps the angle of this piece isn't working for this kind of animation, but the game doesn't tell me, and that makes it so hard for me to enjoy climbing, because some of the animals really have these jittery animations, and that kind of ruins it for me. Now in this video I'm going to try to give an answer to some of the issues that are causing frustrations, and I'll start with the one that is inherent to the climbing system itself. But I think the biggest issues are, however, in the UI surrounding the climbing system. Let's take a look at that. Of the three issues that I mentioned earlier, I think only one of them is really inherent to the climbing system itself, and that is that animals don't climb enough. Or, more correctly, some animals don't climb enough, because we did make the distinction earlier between animals like koala, binturong, red panda, who spend a lot of their time resting in trees, resting on climbing frames, whilst big apes, monkeys, cats, and bears, for instance, use climbing frames primarily as a form of enrichment. And I must admit that for the latter group, Frontier has actually implemented it in a way that is quite realistic. When you go and visit the zoo and go to the bonobo enclosure, for instance, then you always go there with the hope that they're going to be on their climbing frames, but the reality is that a lot of the time they're also just sitting around in a group on the grass, not climbing at all. And that's a disappointment that you can feel in reality and also feel in this game. So I think there they went for a very realistic approach. However, reality is good, but exaggeration is better in this game, because you spend so much of your time building and managing your zoo and much less time actually looking at the animals interact with what you do. And if you spend a lot of time building a climbing frame and building an enclosure, you kind of want to see them spend as much time on that climbing frame as possible. So I do think for the latter group of animals, the climbing needs to be exaggerated just a tiny little bit more, to a point where we see them climb just a little bit more. I don't want it to go too far, because otherwise you get a very unrealistic solution. So for animals like koala, binturong, and red panda, I very much agree that these animals need to spend a lot more time on a climbing frame and or in trees. But big apes, monkeys, cats, and bears, I like where it is right now, as long as they can just bump it up a little bit to a degree where it gets just where they get it just right, where we can just see them climb just that little bit more. Now, to understand how we can solve it for the first group of animals, we first of all need to understand that climbing is based on needs. The entire system in Planet Zoo is a needs-based system. When an animal's hungriness level gets to a certain threshold, it will start looking for food and it will start eating. When the rest levels are at a certain threshold, they will find a place to rest and sleep, and so on and so on. And for the latter animals that we mentioned, the big apes, the monkeys, the cats, and the bears, I think the current implementation works really well. The primary focus is enrichment, and I think for those animals that is just perfect, because for them it's mostly enrichment based in zoos as well. In the game, it's also tied to exploration, which was one of the things that was increased somewhere along the updates to make animals climb a bit more. And it's also tied to resting, because for instance, big cats will rest on logs, and bears will do that as well. So like, for me, that system works really well, as long as they just can bump it up a little bit, that the animals just do it a little bit more than they would do it in real life. But for some other animals, the climbing system needs a different focus. It can't just remain on enrichment. And there, I think it needs to switch to something like a rest-based system, where the resting need is the primary need for climbing. Animals like koalas, bintrongs, and red pandas, whenever they want to rest, they should climb into a tree and rest there, and be much less based around exploration and enrichment. As long as rest can be the primary focus, I think these animals will be able to spend a lot more time on the climbing frame, especially if they increase the amount of rest that these animals need. So for me, this is one of the biggest issues in the climbing system itself, whilst the other two issues that I mentioned are not really inherent to the climbing system, but more so inherent to faults in the UI. To understand why I feel confident enough to say that one of the biggest issues about the climbing system is actually the UI and not the system itself, is because of my background. If you're new to this channel, I'm a senior front-end developer. I specialize in creating UIs for large-scale and complex applications. Think about software for governments, care homes, hospitals, big industries, big businesses. So with all that background, I feel like I'm confident enough to say that the UI that we have for the climbing system just is missing a few things. And we can take a look at the traversable area overview to really hammer that down. Because here in this screenshot, I've just used the base game climbing pieces, and these are actually base game blueprints. I just added a few little extra platforms, and for the most part, everything seems to be climbable except for these two platforms. For some reason, and I don't know why, these platforms are not working. And that is my biggest gripe with the UI regarding the climbing frame. It is too much of what we call a black box. In software, when we refer to something as a black box, we mean that we have a piece of software that gets input and returns output without us knowing the inner workings of the software that transforms that input to the output that we're working with. A good example of a black box that you probably know from real life is things like your YouTube feed, your Instagram feed, your TikTok feed. Any social media feed is basically black box. We as outsiders have no idea what the software actually does, what the algorithm actually does, and it means that we can't tweak the input to something that will give us a better output. And I think that's one of the biggest issues with Planet Zoo climbing system, and I think you can fix this quite easily in 3 simple steps. First of all, allow the UI to explain more. Currently, they mixed the traversable area overview and the climbable area into one height map, but I think if you allow it to just explain the climbable area, you can get so much better results. So we can go from this to this, where we just look at the climbable area. Now, this overview, in my opinion, gives me a much clearer idea of what works and what doesn't work. All the pieces that are highlighted in green are traversable, and all the pieces that are highlighted in red simply are not accessible for the climbing animal. The pieces in orange, as you can see by the icon, and if we would hover over it, it would tell us that it means that it's obstructing another piece close to it. So it's actually climbable, but this piece causes issues with red pieces around it. And this makes it so much easier for me to understand what I need to adjust to make this climbing frame work. And that is one of my biggest gripes with the game right now. I am perfectly okay with the fact that the climbing system has limitations, but the game really does have to tell me what those limitations are. And on top of that, when we think about the weird climbing that we got earlier on, the game could give us some advice. For instance, the climbing frame that I used caused issues when the clouded leopard climbed on top of this. It rested in a very weird position here, and that's why there's also the angle icon at the top in the highlight bar. It simply shows us, hey, this piece is climbable, but because of the angle, it is going to cause issues with certain animations. And for me, this is a solution in case Frontier just can't get everything to look 100% perfect, which I think is possibly realistic. I do hope that they can tweak the jitter to an extent that we don't have these issues anymore. But if it's not fixable, then I think the UI should show me, hey, these pieces might cause issues on these pieces. The climbing just won't be as good as you want it to be. So if you want to adjust them, you can do it now. And on top of that, allow the UI to tell us what is wrong. I'll go back to the example that I showed at the very start of the video. Here we have the UI of the climbing frame that didn't work. And still, I stand by what I said earlier. I see a bunch of green lines. I know that they are not connected, but I would assume if I see green lines that a piece is climbable and that you should be able to traverse this thing. That's what green as a color indicates to me. But we all know that the rope coil pieces are causing issues. In the new solution to the climbing UI, this would be shown by just highlighting these pieces in a black color. As you can see at the top in the bar as well, there it says pieces that are highlighted in black, those are obstructing pieces completely. And again, this kind of solution just points us into the direction of, hey, it's these pieces that are causing the issue. If the game doesn't tell me that those pieces are an issue, then I'll just spend hours and hours trying to figure out and trying to make it work the way that I want it to work. But instead, the game could just tell us, because the game already knows. It made the calculation and it stopped the animal from climbing on these pieces. So it should be able to then transfer that information to the UI, and then the UI should be able to transfer that information to us. So again, I think with very simple changes, by simply highlighting pieces instead of just using the green lines, we can get so much more information about our climbing systems. And that would take away so much frustration, because now you know, okay, there are limits to this climbing system, but the game tells me what the limits are instead of keeping them from me. Now, I personally think this is a good solution, but it needs iteration. I wouldn't be showcasing this if I didn't think this was a good solution to the problems that I have, but I really want to stress that this is not a perfect solution. I made this in like 45 minutes, and the majority of the time I spent on just editing screenshots. This is not a production ready solution, because I can understand that some people will probably watch this and say, wow, why didn't Frontier just do this right away? This works really well. I'm going to show you why it doesn't work perfectly, because I know enough about accessibility to know that this solution would break down completely if you have, for instance, some form of color blindness. All of a sudden, the highlighted colors don't make sense anymore, and I can't even tell the difference between elements that are highlighted in green or are highlighted in red. So this solution itself might be good, but it still does need some iteration. There needs to be some more people looking at this, but I think this is a good start to make the climbing system much less frustrating for us as users. Even if Frontier isn't able to completely make the climbing system function a lot better than it was before, I think these simple solutions will just make it easier for us to then just build the climbing frames that the climbing system allows, rather than building climbing frames that the climbing system just doesn't seem to be able to handle. Thank you so much for watching this episode. If you have comments and feedback on the solutions that I've proposed, please let me know in the comments. I really think those are interesting. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see more on my channel, please go check out the Zoo of Ghent, my current zoo series, or watch the video in the series of the Road to Planet Zoo 2.